Welcome to CEC online lectures. In today's lecture, I will discuss some advanced tools for argument. Though deduction is the backbone of logic and critical thinking, not all arguments we encounter in science and our day-to-day lives are deductive. Rather, many, if not most, of the arguments we encounter in our day-to-day living are either inductive or abductive. What is common to deductive, inductive, and abductive arguments is that their virtue lies in the quality of the inference involved in each. In a deductive argument, the inference is a valid one, that is, the conclusion is necessarily inferred from the premises. Further, when critically evaluating ordinary deductive arguments, we also determine whether it is sound or unsound. That is, whether or not all the premises are true. All inductive and abductive arguments are technically invalid, as the conclusion does not necessarily follow from the premises. So, their virtue lies in something other than validity. In inductive arguments, it lies in how strong the induction is. In today's language, it means how strong a statistical evidence is for the inference. In abductive arguments, the virtue lies in how plausible the inference is to give the best explanation of an event. Both inductive and abductive arguments are complex and sophisticated. However, I'll keep it simple and concentrate on how critical thinking is involved in evaluating inductive and abductive arguments. In this lecture, I will focus on induction. I have already given examples of strong and weak inductive arguments in my previous lecture. The example of the sun rising tomorrow because it has risen every day so far is an inductively strong argument because the inductive inference here conveys something like 99.999999999% probability that the conclusion will be true. But in the example of the dog not biting, the probability that the inference conveys may be 80%, which is just not good enough in sophisticated statistical arguments because the required standard is more than 98.5%. But let us avoid getting into statistics proper. We are in fact interested in some do's and don'ts of statistics and statistical inferences. Mark Twain, the great American writer, popularized the saying, there are lies, there are damn lies, and then there are statistics. The way statistics are thrown at us every day, Mark Twain's sentiment echoes. Politicians use statistics to manipulate in a propaganda manner. Statistics, when properly used, however, are a great tool. And if we have our critical antennas up, we can decipher good from bad statistical arguments. I want to mention some of the do's and don'ts of statistical arguments. Number one, when considering statistical arguments, don't look at aggregates, but look at percentages. We often hear a lot about GDP and that India's GDP has risen over the years. Now, what is this GDP? It is gross domestic product, which is a total measure of the economy. So it is time to do some statistics. Let us see India's GDP ranking over the years. In 1960, India ranked number 10 in the world, ninth in 1965, out of top 10 in 1970, 1975, and 1980. Back at number 10 in 1985, out of top 10 in 1990, 1995, 2000, and 2005. Back at number 9 in 2010, 7th in 2015, and 5th in 2020. These figures are available on the internet, you can check. Now it seems like there is a tremendous improvement since 2005 to 2015 to 2020. But we are talking here about aggregates. and not GDP per capita, which is also roughly equivalent to annual income per capita. Now, what is GDP per capita? GDP per capita means that total GDP divided by the total population. Let us first look at the top 7 countries in total GDP in 2020. I'm referring to aggregates. Number 1 is USA with $20.32 trillion. Number 2 is China with $15.27 trillion. Number 3, Japan with $5.41 trillion. Number 4, Germany, $3.98 trillion. Number 5 is India, $3.54 trillion. Number 6, France, $2.77 trillion. And number 7 is UK with $2.72 trillion. Now, let us look at GDP per capita. As I said, this is the total GDP divided by the total population. When we see the list, none of these countries figure in the top 5. In fact, USA appears at number 7. Surprisingly, the smaller countries are in the top 10 list. Now let us have a look at the ranking of these 7 countries only and see where they are placed among all countries with regard to GDP per capita. And that is shown in the brackets in the slide. Now USA is at number 7, China at number 69, Japan at number 22, Germany at 17, India at 144, France at 23, UK at 25. Notice that whereas in aggregate GDP, India is ranked 5th in the world, in per capita GDP, India is ranked 144th in the world. Now let us see how India has fared in GDP per capita over the years. World ranking is given in the brackets. In 1980, India was at 130th position. In 1990, 129th, 2000, 149, 2010, 144, 2020, 143. Please note that in 1980, India was ranked number 130 and in 2020, number 143. On some sites, it is at 144. What does this data show? It shows though the GDP per capita has gone up 10 times from $276 to $2,379, the ranking has slightly gone down. So we have progressed in one aspect, but not when compared to other nations. We are about the same. Another important factor to look at is GDP growth in percentage over time. In 1961, it was at about 4% growth. It went up and down, dipping to -5% in 1978 and maximum of almost 10% in 1986. Then at 8% in 2015, but dipping to below 7% in 2020. So, we would have to study this data along with a lot of other data very carefully before we can jump to any conclusions about how well India has performed economically. I have given 3 different statistics. Of course, there is a lot more and you can research it easily on the net. The first one of aggregates really does not say much. It only says which are the countries with the biggest economies, and there are historical reasons for this. The other 2 I have provided, each tells a different story and each is significant in its own way, and neither tells the whole story. It will also take us time to understand, analyze, and then critically evaluate each statistic. I went on this diversion to impress upon you that you should always have your critical antennas up. Keep Mark Twain's quotation in mind. There are lies, there are damn lies, and then there are statistics. We come from the land of mathematics of Aryabhat and Brahmagupta. None of us should be shy to get into deep mathematical thinking, to look at deep statistics, not just shallow ones that we are bombarded with on TV channels. Because what we have looked at here is pretty simple arithmetic. One problem with the data we have compiled on percent increase of GDP per capita is that we have only looked at the years 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010 and 2020. Is this sufficient to reach any meaningful conclusions? Not at all. So we can chalk down another do and don't of statistics. For any relevant statistical generalization, the sample size must be sufficiently large. Another requirement of statistical argument is the sample gathered for a statistical generalization should be a random sample. A random sample won't be literally random, as it would have to represent all sections of society according to their proportions in the population. It is not surprising that predictions based on pre election and even exit polls by the Indian media often come out wrong, whereas they are almost always right in the US. It is not because the US has better polling mechanism, but the demographics here are important. Less than 20% of the US population is rural, whereas almost 70% of the Indian population is rural. Yet, the polls in both countries usually ignore the rural areas. In the US, this does not make that much difference, but in India, this makes a huge difference. I'm telling you all this so that next time, while you're watching poll predictions on the electronic media, watch them with a critical thinking cap on and the do's and don'ts of statistics in your mind. It is time for an anecdote of sorts. Blaise Pascal was a genius French mathematician and philosopher who invented probability as a subdiscipline of mathematics. And statistics, which has become such a big thing today, is derived from probability theory and applied almost everywhere. In his lifetime, Pascal invented 50 different calculating machines, improving each time. These were precursors to our computers today. In the history of Western philosophy, there have been numerous proofs offered for the existence of God, from about 4th century CE to the 17th century, when Pascal was living and dying, as he became extremely ill before he died. These include the cosmological argument, the ontological argument, and the argument from design. These proofs were rigorously refined over the centuries. Pascal believed that none of these proofs were ultimately convincing. However, he believed that even if we cannot prove the existence of God in the way that many philosophers and theologians have for centuries believed that they could prove it, we can, however, appeal to reason and convince ourselves that it is better to believe that God exists than to believe that God does not exist. Pascal's reasoning here is famously called Pascal's wager, an appropriate title for the reasoning of the inventor of probability and also a gambler. Here is the crux of Pascal's wager. Now, there are two important things. One, either God exists or God does not exist. Two, either I believe that God exists or I believe that God does not exist. With 1 and 2, I can set up a grid as is shown in the diagram, which you will see on the screen. Now, suppose I believe that God does not exist and live a life of plenty full of pleasures. Let us give a quantitative measure of 100 crore units of pleasure to it. Let us further suppose that God actually does not exist. So we can chalk up 100 crores plus 100 crores in the box of believing that God does not exist and in actuality, God does not exist. Suppose I believe that God exists and I live a godly life, giving up a lot of pleasures so that I have minus 100 crores because I missed having the pleasures I would have sought had I believed that God did not exist. So we can chalk up minus 100 crores in the box of believing that God exists, but in actuality, God does not exist. So we are done with the right side columns. Suppose I believe that God exists and God actually exists. Now, in my afterlife, I will be rewarded with infinite pleasure for living a godly life. So I place the infinity symbol indicating that it is positive infinity in the box of believing that God exists and God actually existing. Finally, let us consider the possibility that I believe that God does not exist, but when I die, I discover that God in fact exists. Oops, I really goofed up. And I'm sent to hell to burn in fire and brimstone, and a negative infinity of pleasure or infinity of pain ensues. So I place a negative infinity in the box of not believing that God exists, but God actually existing. Before we think that there is something odd here, let us remember that Pascal belonged to a fundamentalist sect that believed in heaven and hell, and infinite pleasure in heaven and infinite pain in hell. Now we can come to the real beauty of the wager, which indicates that only a mathematician with the genius of Pascal could have come up with it, as he invented probability. If I don't believe that God exists, I may be almost sure about it and ask, why should I take a chance and that God exists and live a godly life, giving up so many pleasures of life? Perhaps there is only 1 in 100 crore chance that God exists. 1 in 100 crore put in probability quantification is 0.00000001. Now let us calculate what is called expected value of the two possibilities of believing in God's existence and not believing in God's existence. Let me first explain what is expected value. Suppose you buy a lottery ticket for 1000 rupees, picking one number from 1 to 100. Let us say you pick 15. If 15 comes up in the lottery, you will win 91,000 rupees so that you can buy a new iPhone. Let's calculate the expected value of your gamble. There is 1 in 100 chance, that is 0.01, that 15 comes up as the winning number. And there is 99 out of 100 chance, meaning 0.99, that 15 does not come up as the winning number. If you win the lottery, you will get 91,000 minus 1,000 that you spent on the ticket. So you will win 90,000. So we multiply 90,000 by 0.01. 0.01, the chance of your winning, which equals 900. Now we multiply minus 1,000, the price of the lottery ticket, because you've already spent it. So we multiply it by 0.99, which is 0.99 is chance of your not winning, which equals minus 990 rupees. To get the expected value, we must add what you expect to lose from what you expect to gain. So, the expected value is equal to 90,000 into 0.01 plus minus 1,000 into 0.99, which is equal to 900 minus 990, which is equal to minus 90. This means you should not buy the lottery ticket. That is, it is a losing proposition. If you bought one every day, and let us say in some years you win 1 one day, but your long range investment in this will be operating at 10% loss. That is, for 1000 rupees invested, you will get only 900 back. Better to put it in the bank at any interest rate. This is the situation with all gambling possibilities. The lottery owners, the casino owners, and so on will make the profit, not you. No lottery is going to give you 1 lakh or more rupees for your 1000 rupee ticket if you are picking a number which has 1 in 100 chance of winning. So now let us calculate the expected value in Pascal's wager. To calculate the expected value of believing in God's existence, we have to add the expected values of boxes 1 and 2. We do that by multiplying the probability of God existing of 0.000000001 by infinity in box 1, which results into infinity, because infinity multiplied by any positive number will be infinity. In box 2, we multiply minus 100 crore by the probability 0.999999999 of God not existing, and we get minus 99999999. Now, when we add the two up, we get infinity, as any finite number subtracted from infinity will still result in infinity. To calculate the expected value of believing that God does not exist, we add up the expected values of boxes 3 and 4. The reasoning is similar, but now with a result of negative infinity. You can have a look in this slide. Now here, expected value when you believe that God exists is equal to 0.000000001 into infinity plus 0.9999999 into minus 100 crores, which is equal to infinity minus 999999999, which is equal to infinity. Now, the expected value when you believe that God does not exist is equal to 0.000000001 into minus infinity plus 0.9999999 into 100 crores, which is equal to minus infinity plus 999999999, which is equal to minus infinity. Clearly, the expected value of believing that God exists has a better payoff, no matter what the probability of God existing is, as long as it is greater than 0, than the expected value of believing that God does not exist. So, it is more reasonable to believe that God exists than to believe that God does not exist. In other words, you should bet on the possibility of God's existence than on his non-existence. Pascal's wager then is masterful. He saw that not being able to demonstrate the existence of God was no problem for a theologian. He demonstrated instead that it is more reasonable to believe in the existence of God as long as there is even an iota of a chance that God might actually exist. An atheist then would have to be as strong-willed and stringent as a theist in proving that God does not exist. Agnostics will have to bow to Pascal's wager argument. This is a good place to end our discussion of induction. Of course, there is a lot more to induction. At least since Francis Bacon, the English philosopher, inductivism has been strong in science and philosophy of science as a means for acquiring knowledge with sophistications of probability theory. And statistics discussions on induction today have become very technical, and there's no need to enter that now, though I encourage everyone to pursue the matter further. So let us heed Mark Twain's famous quotation, more as a warning rather than as a rule. Statistics are indeed a great tool, but only when used properly. Used improperly, they can harmfully mislead people. As critical thinkers, we must research properly and use statistics in a proper manner, never being obsessed by aggregates. And when the electronic media keeps doing this, we should not fall prey to it. Nonetheless, we should sharpen our statistical skills as statistics are all around us today. Just a philosophical note here may be mentioned, and that is about David Hume, a Scottish philosopher who raised the problem of induction, which was that induction could not be justified. Basically, induction says that based on our experiences of the past, we make predictions for the future. Since the sun has risen at least every day since I have been alive, and as far back as I can remember, I can inductively infer that the sun will rise tomorrow. This assumes that the future will be like the past in this matter. Why should I rely on this principle of induction about future being like the past? I could say that because it has worked in the past. So, what am I doing? I'm justifying induction by induction, and this is circular reasoning. Even though Pascal had invented a mathematical subdiscipline of probability before Hume, the branch of probability and statistics did not get developed properly until the late 19th and 20th centuries. So, Hume was not familiar with the scope of probability theory. Since inductive inferences are probabilistic, the problem of induction cannot be properly framed within contemporary probability and statistics. Anyway, this much for today. Thank you so much. Stay safe. Okay.